I'm going to let Erica introduce our speaker tonight, Bob Meagher, who will be presenting on Greek theater. Thank you, Erica.
You're welcome. Welcome, everybody. This is a wonderful program we're going to be witnessing tonight. Ed Tick, the person who used to be on our board who introduced us to Bob, is sorry that he can't be here tonight to introduce him. So our Jung Association is honored to present Professor Robert Meagher, a distinguished professor of the humanities at Hampshire College. Bob is a special guest for us, using the humanities and especially the ancient Greek tradition to bring depths of wisdom and holistic healing for us all. In addition to his other significant contributions to modern culture and thought, including a recent profound study of Albert Camus, Bob is one of the world's foremost scholars and translators of ancient Greek tragedy, the tradition he shares with us tonight. His translations have been used by leading directors and actors of tragedy in our era, and his scholarship in this field is masterful, passing beyond literary and historical presentations to explore the archetypal depths of this tradition and what it offers to us. Bob has not only taught this and other humanistic traditions, he has directed plays in Ireland, India, and the US. He brings these to our veterans also and those most afflicted, and uses this ancient wisdom for bringing hope and healing into our lives. We are honored to present Professor Meagher to this community. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Erica. I'm very glad and privileged to be here. The ancient Greek theater, as its name theatron indicates, was a seeing place, a house of vision, outer vision and inner vision. To the outer eye, the theater offered spectacle. To the inner eye, it revealed truth. The spectacle on offer included masks, costumes, stage sets, choreography, and action, all together bringing to enactment before the city's eyes the songs, epic and mythic, sung for centuries by the poets. Hidden in those songs and the stories they told lay truth, truth that according to Heraclitus likes to hide, truth that according to Plato we already know and are inclined to forget. The purpose of theater then is not just entertainment, but enlightenment, not just pageant, but revelation. Classical Greek drama, unlike Hellenistic and Roman drama, was a profoundly serious civic and cultic ritual, performed in the sacred precinct or temenos of Dionysos, the god of theater, whose image or murti was carried in procession to the orchestra and placed on stage to witness the dramas performed in his honor and in his presence. The theater of Dionysos in 5th century Athens stood on holy ground, in stark contrast, for example, with the Roman theater in Ephesus, whose neighbors were the public toilets and the city brothel. Lest this unseemly sighting of the Ephesian theater be attributed to thoughtless urban planning, we should remind ourselves that while any portrayal of violence was prohibited in Athenian theater, the citizens of Ephesus enjoyed watching actual and quite deadly sea battles in their watertight theater. We know that some among the ancient theatergoers of Athens wondered about the connection between Dionysus and the dramas staged in his name, because what they saw seemed at times to have little or nothing to do with Dionysus. But that is not our question or concern this evening. We, I presume, are wondering instead what on earth ancient Greek drama might have to do with Carl Jung. Just imagine then Jung miraculously transported to the southeastern slope of the Athenian Acropolis and given a front row seat in the ancient theater of Dionysus. What do you suppose he would make of this experience? The performance, that is, not the trip. When would he nod in concurrence? When would his eyes light up in recognition? When would he wrinkle his brow or pull a disagreeable face? Would he learn anything new? Would he take notes? As it happens, those are my questions to you as you listen to what I have to say this evening about Greek drama. I am no Jungian scholar or practitioner. I will safely confine most of my presentation to ancient sources and leave it to you all in our subsequent discussion to tell me if what I have presented has anything to do with Jung, and therefore says something relevant to you as Jungians. For the sake of clarity and brevity, I will focus my comments on two matters which I believe to be of central and common concerns to Jung and to the Greek tragedians: the stages of life and human becoming or individuation. Jung once wrote that a dream is a theater. So maybe for a moment we may reverse that statement and consider ancient Greek theater as a dream, a daydream, an imagined world in which real things are not really happening. What you see first are the nameless chorus and 2 or 3 named actors, what you see first on the Greek stage, in the Greek theater. A nameless chorus and 2 or 3 named characters. There were never more than 3 such actors on stage at any one time in Greek tragedy. Each drama, of course, had its own mythos or plot, its own story to tell, which by convention would unfold across a single day. Apart from the arc of any individual drama, however, there is the common arc of every human life, from birth to death, from appearance to disappearance. The drama inherent in what Hannah Arendt called natality and mortality. This drama is, of course, not the sole property of Athenian theater, for which, as Shakespeare put it, all the world's a stage. The fact that from hour to hour we ripe, and then from hour to hour we rot and rot, is immediately visible on the Greek stage before any words are uttered or a single step taken. First of all, we see the age of each character in his or her mask. Children's hair is dark, and their faces are smooth, as are those of young women. Young men have dark beards, while old men have white beards. Other visual clues to age are apparent in the clothing worn and bodily posture adopted by each character. We can also judge a character's age, where they are on life's course, by seeing them stand and watching them move. Every character, whatever else we know about them, is somewhere en route from birth to death, and where they are on that arc is crucial to our understanding of them and their story. Consider for a moment the Sphinx's high-stakes riddle in Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. The riddle was, what is it that moves first on 4 legs, then on 2, then on 3? The one-word answer, humanity, is deceptively simple. Coming up with that answer is no great achievement. That every human being, once out of the womb, must tread the path to death is a truism. It's not that, nothing more. The truth, however, is another matter. It must be embodied, lived out, not just roll off the tongue. Oedipus, who thought he had it all figured out, must begin again, return to life's starting block, and learn his truth the hard way, the human truth the hard way. Blind and wailing, crawling on all 4s, smeared in blood, he is as helpless and vulnerable as a newborn. When we see him next in Oedipus at Colonus, an old and broken man, propped up by his daughter, and nearing life's finish line, he will have learned just how far clever wit is from wisdom. In the corpus of Greek drama, Oedipus is not the only one needing a steadying hand or a sturdy staff to stand up and carry on. More often than that, that staff is another person. For Hecabe, it is her handmaid. For Heracles, his friend Theseus. And for the chorus of disheartened, worn-out veterans in Euripides' Heracles, it is each other, the band of brothers. In all of these tableaus of compassion, we witness the same truth. We need each other to keep going and to reach life's finish line on anything resembling our own feet. The point I have been trying to make here is that age is of critical importance on the Greek stage, as it is in life. Every character, whatever else we know about them, is in the thick of it, making their way from birth to death. And to understand who they are and why they say what they say and do what they do, we need to know where they are on the arc of life, on the arc of their life. This is nowhere more clear than in Euripides' Bacchae, where Thebes' young king Pentheus allows his obsessive need for law and order, his puritanical misogyny, and his prurient curiosity to drag him, his mother, and his city into unspeakable ruin. In modern productions of the Bacchae, when Pentheus is cast as a mature man in his 50s or even older, as he often is, we can have little sympathy for him. When we realize, however, that he is still a virtual child, an androgynous adolescent, in the throes of puberty, we see him in every scene through different eyes, and we pity him. He breaks our heart, rather than provoking our contempt. But how are we to know how young he is, and to realize that he is innocent and callow, not callous and corrupt? The answer is that in the theater of Dionysos, we would be shown and told. The otherwise beardless mask of Pentheus would bear the first light signs of vellus hair, or what we call peach fuzz. And in case we can't see that detail from our seats, which might be in a 12,000 seat theater invisible to us, in case we can't see that detail from our seats, Agave, his mother and murderer, calls our attention to it in these words: "Look, on his cheeks, nothing but down." Until they speak, every character in the Greek theater is just a walking mask, a prosopon, literally a face or countenance. It is primarily by sight, by seeing a character's or anyone's face, that we identify or recognize them, which is why we are asked on countless everyday occasions to show our picture ID. In addition to or in lieu of facial recognition, of course, there is also voice recognition. In the dark or behind a closed door or on the phone, we are able to recognize each other by our voices, because our persona is conveyed in our voice as well as in our mask, as well as in our face. It makes sense, therefore, that in Greek theater, the cast of characters comprises a list of prosopa, or faces, and in Roman theater, a list of personae, or voices. Both terms refer to a character's mask, either looked at or heard from. Our face and our voice are admittedly at the same time biological, and for lack of a better word, spiritual, as is our individual identity. Individuation for Jung, the raison d'etre of the self, is both biological and spiritual. In reality, wrote Jung, individuation is an expression of that biological process, simple or complicated as the case may be, by which every living thing becomes what it is destined to become from the beginning. This process naturally expresses itself in man as much psychically as somatically." End of quote. Becoming what we are, in Jung's words, destined to become from the beginning, as Plato and Aristotle understood it, meant living in accord with one's nature, or phusis, from which we get the words physician and physicist, someone who knows all about phusis or nature, yours, mine, the world's. The term originated in early Greek medicine in the school of Hippocrates. Every organism or thing has a nature or phusis, what Aristotle later described as its energeia, or being at work. Put simply and briefly, to know the phusis of anything is to know where it came from and where it is going. In other words, its arc or trajectory, its life cycle. When a physicist, or in this case a botanist, looks at an acorn, she sees an oak tree in its future and an oak tree in its past. In short, she understands its necessary origin and its destiny, because acorns don't come out of nowhere and never become butterflies. The physician, on the other hand, understands the human body and knows, for example, whether to be alarmed or elated over a swollen belly or blood flowing from a place that never bled before. The knowledge and skill of physicians, physicists, and anyone who endeavors to understand the nature of things begin to grow with close observations, noted and shared with other similarly serious, attentive observers. As Mary Oliver wrote, look, oh gosh, now I forget. Suddenly I forgot the quote I was going to, it's not in my paper. Be attentive, pay attention, tell about it. The Greek playwrights and Aristotle were all close observers of human phusis, our destined life cycle, the arc of human becoming. In a word, individuation. Never lost on them, nor on us for that matter, is the fact that we age. And as we age, we change. We don't change our identity, but we do, as it were, change our masks, our personas. We look and we sound different, not from one day to the next, but from one life stage to the next. Two distinct life stages that both Jung and Aristotle focused on were youth and age. Aristotle in his Rhetoric provides a keenly perceptive and surprisingly timeless sketch of youth, by which he meant the prime of life, and age, by which he meant old age. Here are some highlights of Aristotle's commentary on character and on age. This is a rather extended quote from his book on Rhetoric. To begin with, he writes, to begin with the youthful type of character. Young men have strong passions and tend to gratify them indiscriminately. Of the bodily desires, it is the sexual by which they are most swayed and in which they show absence of self-control. They are changeable and fickle in their desires, which are violent while they last, but quickly over. Their impulses are keen, but not deep-rooted. They are hot-tempered and quick-tempered and apt to give way to their anger. Bad temper often gets the better of them, for owing to their love of honor, they cannot bear being slighted and are indignant if they imagine themselves unfairly treated. They look at the good side rather than the bad, not having yet witnessed many instances of wickedness. They trust others readily, but they have not yet been often cheated. Their lives are mainly spent not in memory, but in expectation, for expectation refers to the future, memory to the past, and youth has a long future before it and a short past behind it. Their hot tempers and hopeful dispositions make them more courageous than older men. The hot temper prevents fear, and the hopeful disposition creates confidence. We cannot fear so long as we are feeling angry. An expectation of good makes us confident. All their mistakes are in the direction of doing things excessively and vehemently. They overdo everything. They love too much and hate too much, and the same thing with everything else. They think they know everything and are always quite sure about it. This, in fact, is why they overdo everything. The character of elderly men, men who are past their prime, may be said to be formed for the most part of elements that are the contrary of all these. They have lived many years, they have often been taken in, and often made mistakes, and life on the whole is a bad business. The result is that they are sure about nothing and underdo everything. They think, but they never know. And because of their hesitation, they always add a possibly or a perhaps, putting everything this way, never positively. They are cynical, that is, they tend to put the worst construction on everything. Further, their experience makes them distrustful and therefore suspicious of evil. Consequently, they neither love warmly nor hate bitterly. They love as if they will someday hate, and hate as though they will someday love. They are small-minded because they have been humbled by life. Their desires are set upon nothing more exalted or unusual than what will help them to keep alive. They are not generous because money is one of the things they must have, and at the same time their experience has taught them how hard it is to get and how easy to lose. They are cowardly and are always anticipating danger. Unlike that of the young who are warm-blooded, their temperament is chilly. Old age has paved the way for cowardice. They lack confidence in the future, partly through experience, for most things go wrong, or anyhow turn out worse than expected. And partly because of their cowardice, they live by memory rather than by hope, and for what is left to them of life is but little as compared with the long past. And hope is of the future, memory of the past. This again is the cause of their loquacity. They are continually talking about the past because they enjoy remembering it. Jung echoed some of these same assessments of age and character in his writings. For example, when he wrote that in the second half of life, the wine has fermented and begins to settle and clear. Conservative tendencies develop if all goes well. Instead of looking forward, one looks backward. End of quote. In moments of reverie, we may well lose ourselves in time, remembering ourselves when we were young, and even imagining ourselves young again. None of us, of course, is able as yet to radically alter our age. Changing how we look has always been a temporary option in order to look older or more likely younger. But even to this, there are disappointing limits. Regardless of whether or not we look our age, however, there are countless ways not to act our age. We are free to try this and run the risk of ridicule or reproach. In Greek theater, there are many examples of characters not acting their age, in some cases inviting laughter, and in other cases incurring shame and fierce reprimand. One memorable example of this is provided by ex-king Cadmus and the prophet Tiresias in Euripides' Bacchae. These two old friends, long accustomed to walking on three legs, bent over and propped up by staffs, these two old friends cast aside their walking staffs, lifted up their heels, and danced, momentarily caught up in a frenzy of Dionysian delusion. What could be sweeter for you and me than this, Tiresias tells his friend, to have lost track of how old we are? To which Cadmus responds, the same thing, it's happening to me. I feel like a boy again and ready to dance my heart out. Cadmus's grandson, King Pentheus, we soon find out, is neither charmed nor amused by his grandfather's departure from reality, companioned by the court prophet, and he lets them both know it. I am so ashamed of you, grandfather, to see you so old and so mindless. Shake off that ivy, won't you? Come on, grandfather, just open your hand and drop that thing. Tiresias, I see your persuasive powers at work here. If it weren't for your gray old age, I'd have you shackled and sent off. For Pentheus, the old man's fantasy is a betrayal. His kingdom is flying apart, and he desperately needs the authority and wisdom he lacks. Whatever the attraction of a second childhood, the world needs the elderly to act their age, and the old need the young to step up and act theirs. Individuation and human becoming are serious matters. In the Greek theater, as in life, everyone is expected to act in accord with their age and generational place in life. Biological age and psychic age are supposed to develop in sync with each other. With age comes responsibilities, a lesson many ignore, none more flagrantly than young Admetus of Pherae, whose name literally means untamed, a name he wore like a placard. His father, Pheres, made him an instant king when he stepped down, when he retired from his throne, and gave it all to a son who had earned none of it. Vast tilled fields, rich pasture lands, clear sweet rivers and lakes, countless flocks and sleek steeds, a kingdom as far-reaching as the sun's daily course, from east to west, from the Aegean to the Adriatic. In Euripides' Alcestis, this young king Admetus, the untamed one, lavishly privileged and shamelessly selfish, learned the hard way that being rich and royal exempts no one from having to grow up and face what life throws at them. These lessons do not come easily to a young king who has a god for his slave, Superman for his friend, and a beautiful young wife willing to die in his place. No wonder that when Thanatos, death, comes calling for him, Admetus looks everywhere for a way out. The one exit he's given is that Thanatos agrees to go away this time and every time, provided Admetus always finds someone willing to take his place in death. Admetus first turns to his father and mother with his extraordinary request and is flatly turned down by them. So he despises them, moves on, and asks his wife Alcestis to die for him. She agrees out of love for him, and he accepts her gift. This is too much for Admetus' father Pheres, who realizes now, when it is too late, that he has created a monster. In a scene that surely shocked to their core those who watched it, Pheres, greeted by his son with curses, confronts Admetus and lets him have it with both barrels. Listen, boy, just who do you think you are cursing out? I gave you life, made a man of you, left you with mastery over my house. I am not obliged to die for you. When my turn comes, leave it to me. I'll do the same for you. The fact is, to squeeze free of death, you waged a shameless campaign. Well, your time came and went, and you've still got your life. All you had to do was murder your own wife. You've obviously stumbled on a brilliant scheme for private immortality. It's only a matter of convincing your wife of the hour to do your dying for you. Take this from me. The rest of us are as fond of our lives as you are of yours. Harsh words, but true, that all people, young or old, love their lives as much as we do. And it's something that not only Admetus needs to hear and ponder. As Heracles' Superman friend later reminds him, living well, living truthfully, means always thinking mortal thoughts. Having reflected on individuation as a biological process, now we return to individuation as a psychic process, by which, as Jung put it, we become what we are destined to become from the beginning. We know, however, that there are seemingly countless conceptions of the stages on life's way, as Kierkegaard put it, shaping character and leading to a state of human completion or well-being, a state that Aristotle called eudaimonia, or blessedness. Nietzsche, for example, in Thus Spake Zarathustra, envisioned three metamorphoses, from camel to lion to child, which bears a striking resemblance to the Hindu division of the full ideal life into four sequential stages, or ashramas: the student, the householder, the forest dweller, and finally the renunciate. The Brahmin student, after all, may with some accuracy be described as a pack animal, heavily laden with the weight of tradition, which he both throws off and builds upon to make his own place and leave his own mark in the world, eventually to retire from that world and prepare for birth as a simpler, kinder, gentler being. And for Jung too, as fully as for the Brahmin forest dweller and renunciate, our final defining relationship is with the infinite and the eternal. In the unfolding of any life, there may only be several major stages or periods, mirroring our biological life cycle: infancy and senescence, adolescence and middle age, and everything in between these are not optional. I must run the same course as you. Along life's way, however, the possible shapes that our character might take, like Jung's archetypes, are numerous and varied. Human history, as Heidegger understood it, is the repetition of the possible, and the same would seem to be the case with the story of every human life, and for that matter, the plot of every drama. Here we need to keep in mind that the possible is plural, as are Jung's archetypes and their shadow forms. Indeed, might not these archetypes be seen and understood as what Heidegger had in mind when he wrote of history as the repository of the humanly possible, from which our multifarious personal characters, our masks, our myths, and our character-driven lives emerge? Inevitably, I believe, we must go on to wonder and ask whether some of these possibilities, these possible personas and lives, are better than others. Are some lives, to use the ancient measure, more worthy, more worth living than others? While there might be general agreement that a long life is preferable to a short one, and a healthy life preferable to a sickly one, can we argue with conviction that a good life is preferable to or better than an evil one? An examined, conscientious life better than an impulsive, irresponsible one? Jung lamented what he saw in the modern world as a collective loss of soul, and Camus accused his generation, and ours by extension, of no longer being willing to make moral distinctions, even between healers and murderers, or for that matter, between victims and executioners. We have come to accept it as a given fact that any moral compass you or I might consult is purely private, with no deeper meaning or wider legitimacy than a personal token or a sentimental keepsake. Moral compass readings have become meaningless in today's world because here there is no true north, just my north, and that may be your south. Returning to our focus on Jung and the theater of Dionysos, we may well ask whether the ancient Athenian stage was a morally neutral platform. The corpus of ancient Greek drama was, after all, notoriously replete with atrocities. An innocent child hurled from the city walls, a king slaughtered in his bath by his wife, thrones usurped, brothers murdered by brothers, incest, matricide, the list goes on, all enacted in a sacred precinct, in the direct sight or earshot of divine Dionysos. Was all this, we wonder, for the sake of spectacle and entertainment, without any indication of disapproval, much less condemnation? Was the theater of Dionysos as devoid of moral compass as our local cineplex? The fact is that in ancient Greek theater, there was a moral code visible to all visible to all in the sets, the blocking, and the stage direction of every drama. I've already noted that all violence was banned from open sight as unseemly, left to the imagination. This meant on the Greek stage there was no graphic bloodshed, in stark contrast to the bloodbaths splashed across our cinema screens. The bloodless violation of another's humanity that we witness in Greek drama are more subtle, and might be witnessed in the bending of a knee, or what's worse, one character's proskynesis or prostration before another character. What we need to know is that the Greek theater, like the universe, is reflected and was triple tiered, divided and arranged in a vertically hierarchy, with gods on high, humans and beasts below them, a hierarchy laid out in the poetry of Hesiod and Homer. Humanity's place, as Plato reiterated, lay in the middle, and our proper posture is upright, 2 feet solidly planted on the earth, from where we look up to the gods and down on the beasts, but straight into each other's eyes. This cosmic design or order, what the Greeks called taxis, is threatened any time a human being occupies an elevated platform, a dais or throne, or towers over another human being in status or clout. We know this is happening when we see one character lower their eyes, bow, take the knee, kneel, grovel, or prostrate themselves before another character, before another fellow human being. In the Greek theater, the gods, for their part, hover over the acting space, appearing above the set or skene, or else swung out and suspended over the stage on a crane, in a theophany that has come to be known as a deus ex machina. When a human character, therefore, appears above the stage, as did Medea in the Euripidean tragedy by that name, it means that she has so profoundly denied and disfigured her humanity that she is playing a god, displaying a blasphemous hubris that assures her ruin. The additional fact that she proudly displays the mutilated bodies of her own sons, whom she has slain, fully explains and seals her condemnation. To suggest that Euripides, as is often suggested, to suggest that Euripides is celebrating Medea in this moment as a powerful woman who broke her shackles and evened the score with the patriarchy is to totally miss the point. Medea's husband, Jason, is reprehensible, but so is Medea. In the theater of Dionysos, one wrong does not excuse another, and poetic justice, however satisfying, is never justice and never sweet. The metaphysical and moral order manifest in the Greek theater is philosophically scrutinized and defended in the Republic of Plato when it is asked why anyone would be just, or why anyone would do the right thing, when he finds himself with the power and the opportunity to have and do anything he wants. It comes down to the fact that neither absolute power nor absolute weakness befits humanity. We are neither gods nor beasts. No one of us can ever attain absolute power, nor should we, and none of us need ever accept absolute weakness. The gods can do whatever they wish, and animals must do whatever they are told. We humans are in between, navigating the middle ground between the tyranny of the gods and the subservience of the beasts. Our dignity, well-being, and completion lie in maintaining our upright posture, never subduing or lording it over others, and always offering a hand. Just a moment, I'm sorry. Technical problem for a moment. My screen jumped to the very beginning, and I'm sure you don't want me to begin again, so I'm going to find where I was. Our dignity, well-being, and completion lie in maintaining our upright posture, never subduing or lording it over others, and always offering a hand to those who have fallen or been struck down. We humans are, as Euripides made clear over and over in his plays, we are, as human beings, by nature, friends. And friendship, as Plato makes clear, is the bond of the city, the human circle. Any man, wrote Euripides, who would prefer great wealth or power to love, the love of friends, is sick to the core of his soul. With these words, I believe, Euripides summed up his deepest convictions and expressed what his moral compass defines as true north. Jung's true north may well be found in his partly autobiographical work, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, written only several years before his death, a work that was my first introduction to Jung a little over a decade after his death. I suggest we focus here on these words of his. The decisive question for man, he writes, the decisive question for man is he related to something infinite or not? That is the telling question of his life. Only if we know that the thing which truly matters is the infinite can we avoid fixing our interest upon futilities and upon all kinds of goals which are not of real importance. The more a man lays stress on false possessions and the less sensitivity he has for what is essential, the less satisfying is his life. In the final analysis, we count for something only because of the essential we embody. And if we do not embody that, life is wasted. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. If there was ever a metaphysician among the roster of ancient Greek playwrights, it was Sophocles, particularly as he grew into extreme old age. And if there was ever a play of his that spoke to the infinite and humanity's relationship to it, that play was Oedipus at Colonus, the last of his plays, written in his late 80s and produced posthumously after his death at age 90 or 91. Recalling the Hindu ashramas, as well as Nietzsche's Metamorphoses, we can see in the course of Sophocles' life the student, the lion, the child, and the sannyasi. Sophocles had been a warrior, twice a general, for a time the imperial treasurer, a playwright for 6 decades, a magistrate in time of grave national crisis, and a legendary priest in the cult of Asclepius, the god of healing, ritually welcomed to the city of Athens in 420 BCE. In ways too numerous and complex to unravel here, Sophocles' life and times are tightly woven into his 2 surviving dramas centered on Oedipus, Oedipus Tyrannus, mistakenly known as Oedipus Rex, in large part a direct commentary on the rise and fall of Sophocles' friend Pericles, and Oedipus at Colonus, a rare glimpse into the worn, weary, yearning soul of Sophocles. Exploring these masterworks fully, of course, would lead us well beyond the scope of tonight's discussion. Returning as we must to our focus on Jung's decisive question and applying it to Oedipus, we ask, is he related to something infinite or not? And is that the telling question of his life? When Oedipus enters Colonus, the last time we saw him on stage, he was blind and blood-soaked, led from Thebes by his daughter Antigone into the remote forested wilds of qevatron, where he would disappear and spend decades as a hermit in banishment and exile, accompanied only by his daughter Antigone. Now he emerges from his exile, a wanderer, homeless, with his child no longer a child, asking for nothing more than a place where we might rest. Oedipus has very little to say about what his years in exile were like. 2 words sum it up: suffering and time. Later he adds a few details about going without shoes, and hungry, beaten by many rains, tired by the sun. The chorus suggests we would do well to use our imaginations in thinking about those years of Oedipus's exile. And these are the words of the chorus, igniting our imaginations in thinking of those years. Think, they sing, think of some shore in the north, the concussive waves make stream. This way and that in the gales of winter. It is like that with him. The wild rack breaking over him from head to foot and coming on forever. Now from the plunging down of the sun, now from the sunrise quarter, now from where the noonday gleams, now from the night and from the north. Oedipus is not only battered and broken, he is also transformed. Once a lion, he is a child again, awaiting rebirth. Blind to this world, his eyes strain to see beyond it. Oedipus comes as a renunciate, a beggar, asking for nothing more than a resting place, a final resting place. And this place he has stumbled onto in his search happens to be holy ground, the sanctuary of the Furies, the daughters of darkness and mysterious earth. His host and protector here is Theseus, king of Athens, as Colonus lies just beyond the city walls, and in return Oedipus assures him, I come to give you something, and the gift is my own beaten self. No feast for the eyes, yet in me is a more lasting grace than beauty. Theseus only begins to understand what this lasting grace might mean when Oedipus's hour has come, signaled by incessant thunder and continuous flashing of lightning from the hand of God. Moments later, Oedipus goes off again into the wild, this time to die, taking only his daughters and Theseus with him. But after a while, Antigone and Ismene will be sent back, and only Theseus will know the place of Oedipus's death, a secret he must never reveal to anyone. The only account we have of what happened after Oedipus and Theseus walked off to encounter the infinite is that of the omniscient messenger, and every line of his entire speech richly rewards close reading and thoughtful meditation, neither of which we can give it here. The parting of Oedipus and his girls is painful and prolonged until a voice calls out over and over from nowhere and from everywhere, Oedipus, Oedipus, why are you waiting? You delay too long. You delay too long to go. The gods are impatient. They want Oedipus to renounce his last ties to this life and this world. The gods are restless for his company. All we are told after that is that Oedipus, sending off his daughters, did reverence to earth and to the powers of the air. And we read in those last words, it was not lightning bearing its fire from God that took him off. No hurricane was blowing, but some attendant from the train of heaven came for him, or else the underworld. The underworld opened in love, the unlit door of death, the unlit door of earth. For he was taken without lamentation, without illness or suffering. Indeed, his end was wonderful, if ever a mortal's was. I will not presume here to suggest what we should make of this story of these words, but I would argue that it answers in the affirmative the questions which immediately led us here. Is he, Oedipus, related to something infinite or not? And is that the telling question of his life? I would go further, however, and argue that the same may be said with confidence of Sophocles. This play was his last work, and the final words of the play were his last words. Surely he would want to be remembered by them and held to them. In conclusion, I leave it to all of you to tell me what you think Jung would make of them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob. The floor is open for questions, and Andy will be guiding us to handle the flow of the discussion.
If you would like to ask a question, please try the raise hand feature. Bob, I have a question to get this rolling, if I may. I'm wondering, you mentioned phusis and associated that with the verb to grow. And I wonder if that relates also to perfection, the idea of being completed or perfected, like in the sense of an acorn having the potential of being an oak.
Oh, it has everything to do with that. I mean, because phusis is the full arc, and a full arc that begins, in the case of an acorn, with the it being nourished and sprouting and reaching it's destined, it's intended, its full completion, which also involves the dropping of acorns to begin the cycle all over again. I mean, that then there was it, and a life, any life of any being, including human being, that is distracted, distorted, cut off from its completion is a violation of that being's nature or phusis. I mean, the Camus, who's very often considered, he just is repeatedly called an existentialist, whereas throughout his entire life, he said there was no position of mind, there was no philosophy or view that he most detested and aimed all his writings against than existentialism. He kept saying, "I'm not an existentialist," and his daughter has spent her life, echoing that, reinforcing it, and I wrote, the book that was mentioned that I wrote, tries to assert that as fiercely as I can, and what he said, the heart of existentialism is that it denies human nature, and in that way echoes a kind of consensus almost of our age, that there's no such thing as human nature. And he said, like the Greeks, I believe in nature. I uphold human nature, and we and the atrocity of violating it in others or in ourselves. So yeah, he knew very well how unpopular, how untimely that was in our day. But I think it lies at the root of our soullessness. And it's a misunderstanding that human nature was subverted. The notion of a human nature, of a human phusis, was subverted by thinking that human nature is, if there's a human nature, it would be represented in what everyone is doing, and that was never the understanding of the of the ancient Greeks, or of ancient Greece, or of Camus for that matter. That it's not a sociological or an anthropological summation of what of behavior that you would come to by observing as many human beings as possible and see what their behavior and lives have in common. And it was a moral measure, a moral line, or a moral, an ethical definition, not a behavioral one. If that makes any, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm following. I realize I have a follow-up question, and it may be, I don't know, too deep for this moment, but I've been looking at the experience of the original peoples on this land and the impact of colonization, and especially the effect on children. And I've been asking, it's kind of a thought experiment or a kind of philosophical question. What is the significance of a life interrupted? Like, and just to extend that, all of those trees would have died eventually. All of the people would have died in the course of their lives. But there was this interruption, this cutting off of the potential of the fullness of life. I wonder if you have a comment about that.
Well, it was a terrible crime. I mean, there's no that each. I mean, in the terms that I've been expressing and laying out, to disfigure and cut short the fulfillment. I mean, the completion of the arc, the proper arc of a human life is a great violation. I think, I mean, you would know so much better than I would. I mean, it seems like in Jung's view, the psychic individuation, psychic unfolding of a human life should match the biological one. And so to die as a child, to die as, especially to be murdered as a child, to have, for someone to consciously deprive another human being of their life, of their youth, of their adulthood, of their old age, or whatever, that is it's a violation. And so also I think there's a spiritual evolution or a spiritual development that is meant to unfold in accord with and in support of the biological, and vice versa. And any attempt to any act, it seems to me that in which anyone presumes to interrupt or violate that in others, so as in some way to assert themselves, is a terrible, is it an atrocious act. But I'd love to hear your voices on all this.
Christine, did you have your hand raised? You're muted, Christine.
I'm going to let Mimi go first.
Okay, Mimi?
I just have so much. I love theater, and that was exquisite, and Colonus is one of my absolute favorite plays. So thank you. And a few things, I want a comment and a question. Comment picks up from what Andrew just said, which is my sense of the structure of Colonus, Bob, is there's Oedipus, barely able to stand up, Antigone holding him up. And he gets interrupted and interrupted and interrupted and interrupted in his mission to get into the sacred space he wants to get into. And there is a great sense I have of an extraordinary stamina and of his phusis, I think, which he is just determined to complete his life in a way that moves through everything that happened to him and coming back around to Sophocles' birthplace, Colonus. And I would love to hear your thoughts about that. And also, my real big question to you has to do with the mask and in its practice in Asian theater is that you put on the mask and it reveals the soul, does not hide, but reveals. And if you've ever done neutral mask work, which I've done in training for mime, you put on a neutral mask and you turn around and you face your fellow actors in training and they say what they see, your face, right? And the seeing of soul is shocking. It's so strong. And I would love to hear your insights and your comments about the use of the masks and soul and persona in Greek theater. So those are my two big things.
Well, thank you. Those are wonderful comments and question, and a beautiful reading of Oedipus, Sophocles. I mean, Sophocles is Oedipus at Colonus, which you're exactly right. I mean, he is trying to finish his life the way it was intended. His life and every life is intended to end, and it's a struggle, not only because he's old and weak and blind, and he's been constantly attacked, and everything, but the fact that it's a struggle and what he's up against is suggested by the Greek in his entrance. He describes himself as as in a race, a running race. And he's just turned, as the play begins, he says, I have turned I have rounded the last post in the race.
Right.
And now I'm, this is the sprint, this is the finish line. He's trying to get to the finish line. And first of all, he knows there's a finish line. It's not just death. It's a proper death. It's a death fully conscious of the meaning of life and of his relationship with the sacred. And he said, I finally now, as I'm in my last steps, trying to stagger towards that finish line, I realize, he says, I am in holy ground. I am on holy ground. In some ways, he's hallowing it by his death. But
yes.
And when he takes too long, and it's not just him who's taking it too long, it's everyone around him, burdening him with these things that in the end of his life, he should not be burdened with. The gods cry out and say, for God's sake, why are you waiting? I mean, we've waited too long for you. And it's just, I think it's you could live with that play and those words, for the rest of your life and be guided by them. But with respect to masks, I think what you're saying is so important because one of the plays I directed was in India, working with two indigenous tribal, they call them in India the tribal peoples. I mean, these are the indigenous or early pre-Aryan, the first peoples of India, and they have a long tradition of masked drama, and I did a production with them, and with my wife helped me so much with this. We were in an overnight train ride and a long from Calcutta, a long overnight train ride, and then a bumpy Land Rover trip across country into this tribal area. And they have a tradition of dance drama that people are trained from age 5. Many of them but it's masked drama. and we did a version of, I had translated Aeschylus as Seven Against Thebes, which it would be too long to go into, but the story, the mythos or plot of Seven Against Thebes directly parallels a deep story in the tradition of these peoples. That's not by accident. You know, their stories are very often taken from ancient Indian epic, and in this case, the Mahabharata, as were the Greek plays taken as slices, as it was put, slices from the Homeric epics. And so anyway, in this case, the story was the same. Now, I didn't speak their language at all, and there were several languages involved, several non-English languages, the tribal language, and Bengali and Hindi, and another tribal language. So the translation was wild, going back and forth. But when it was finally unfolded, what the plot of the story was that we were going to do, and it was Aeschylus, they said, we know that story, and so we constructed a drama in their style, in their traditions, in their dance drama traditions. It was a production of Aeschylus, brought over to and ingested and produced by these dancers, musicians, and actors, but the masks, the masks that they wore, they considered sacred. In other words, these were when you put on the mask of if you put on the mask of Shiva, or you put on the mask of you were inhabited by that, and the masks had to be. We had to have special masks made for the play, and there was a small ritual ceremony to cut open the eyes. Mm. And they had this young boy, in fact, the son of the mask maker, he, in front of everyone, cut open the eyes, made the eyes, opened the eyes, and at that moment, the mask was consecrated, or another way, more properly, inhabited. So when you put on the mask, which was inhabited by whoever you were portraying, a god or a human, that you were possessed by them, and so their masks were powerful. They were power streamed through them. They weren't costumes. They were there.
It makes me think of Jung's archetypes were described, of course, as actors. I mean, it's a dramatic concept, really. And the notion of not letting yourself be possessed by the archetype, and yet the archetype is moving through you, is acting through you. Mm-hmm. There is something very powerful about this opening of the eyes that suggests you can see and be seen. The archetypes can be seen and be, seen and be seen. It's very, very powerful stuff. Thank you very much for that. Mm-hmm. And I imagine it was the same in the Greek theater. A similar sense must have been part
Absolutely.
of the practice.
Well, the actors were considered sacred for the period of time during the drama. During the dramatic festival of Dionysos, the days in which that was unfolding, they were to commit to hurt them in any way, to strike one of them, whatever, was a sacrilege. I mean, it was in their ordinary lives before and after the festival, they were back to on their own merits and their own devices. But during the festival, when they were acting in those plays, they were not their feet, in a sense, weren't on the same ground as everyone else. And when I did this play in India, we had, because drama was sacred to Shiva. Shiva is the Dionysos of India, and the god of theater. I knew that in the ancient world, and not the contemporary world, but in traditional India, the acting place was sacred, and it needed to be consecrated, and all of the actors and the musicians had to be blessed and consecrated before the performance. So I said I wanted to, and for these people these were not professional actors or professional dancers. This was a tribal tradition, and they understood perfectly what we had a ceremony to Shiva to initiate the launching of the joint effort. But in the actual performances, there was a circular space created simply by taking a large rope, tying the two ends of it together and forming a circle, and that was the acting space, and we had to consecrate that. So I found out where the nearest priest of Shiva was, and I asked him if he would consecrate the space and bless the actors, and he was so relieved. He was so happy. He said, "No one asks for that anymore. But theater should be enacted in a sacred space, in a sacred temenos." So he said, he was delighted to do it. In real life, or not real life, in his other life, he's a medical doctor, a lovely man. And but when he's the priest, when in his capacity as a priest of Shiva, he came and before every performance, he consecrated the space when we laid because it was all performed outside, simply in an open space, because we performed in different places, moved it eventually to Calcutta. But anyway, he blessed the space and then blessed the actors, and the musicians and the dancers and so on, and they all, they knew it. They weren't accustomed to it happening any longer. But it would be like when I was a child, priests would, if you got a new apartment or a new house, you would come over and ask the parish priest to come and bless your house or your new apartment. And there'd be a blessing. I mean, that's not the part of a closing anymore of real estate. But that was, and I don't know what if a priest today were asked, say, "I just moved, would you come over and bless my house?" Old priests, old Irish priests in particular, maybe would probably have the same reaction. No one has asked me to do that in the past 50 years. But anyway, that was the way it was received, and it caused great problems for us. Just as I won't go on much further, but it was interesting. We had to borrow spaces, open spaces, to perform, and one of the places we asked to perform in one town was a big sports field that belonged to the local Christian evangelical church. And they said, "Fine, we'd love to have a theatrical production." But when they heard, before opening night, when they heard that we were going to be consecrating that space to pagan deities, they told us, they said, "No way, the permission rejected." And it caused a real crisis for us at that point, because we had announced where the play was being performed and everything. But they said, "No way are we going to allow this field is consecrated, to Christ, and you're not going to consecrate it to Shiva, whatever that means." And So we were expelled. So it was taken seriously, from both sides in a way.
Bob, I see we have 3 hands up.
Okay.
Let's go
Yeah,
with
great.
Christina, followed by Christine.
So I have kind of more like a clarifying or basic question about the fusis, which is not a concept I knew about before. But like the idea of this narrative arc of one's life, and like an actual person as opposed, or my question is about like people versus characters in plays. I'm wondering if like everyone, if you feel like everyone, or like with the fusis, does everyone live up to their fusis? Like, I mean, it kind of depends like everyone's personal take on like fate and stuff, but is like if you look at the end of your life, like everything that like your narrative arc, is it inherently the one that you were supposed to have when you were born, like the one that was like right, like written for your character, or yeah, or is it like maybe at the end of your life, like you didn't end up like kind of fulfilling that narrative arc? I'm just kind of curious about that. And I guess, yeah, it's a question more like fate and destiny and stuff, but if you have any.
Well, the Greeks were a good question. The Greeks were particularly concerned with human physis. It wasn't individual. It didn't have to do with the persona, as it were. Each persona is at their core a human being behind the individual mask that they wear, as it were. So it's human physis, human nature, the unfolding of human life. Each of us has our own take, as it were, our own identity, but the identity is just an individuation, I suppose you would say, in Jungian terms. It's not personal individuation is meant, I think, to be an individualization of something that is more common, more humanly common, more shared, that we all, does that make sense? I mean, it's our humanity that we're primarily responsible to, answerable to, as it were, and should try to realize. I mean, Oedipus in Oedipus at Colonus, in trying to end his life, when he answered that riddle as a very young man, a really screwed up early young man, and thought he was so clever answering the riddle of the Sphinx, saying that human beings walk first. First of all, we crawl. We're on 4 legs when we haven't yet learned to walk. We come out of the womb crawlers. We then eventually stand on 2 legs, and then eventually we lean in old age. That path of life, that arc of life. But he didn't know what the hell that meant. That was a clever riddle of a clever, witty answering of a riddle. And the whole story of Oedipus, I think, is he learned what it's like to actually live that. And I think it's basically the same for everyone. So the Oedipus at Colonus is universal in its the details of his story are individual. The common path, the common arc, is universal. Is that? I think we've lost that sense completely today, but practically universally. I don't. But
Yeah, sorry.
How do you feel about that? Yeah.
I'm understanding the physis as, yeah, just the process of biological and psychic aging, essentially, right? Kind of like not that, like structurally.
Not just aging. It's also growing up. It's also flourishing.
Yeah.
Whatever. I mean, take the example of the acorn in the oak tree. I mean, the oak tree. Here in New England, we can see there's so many species of oak trees, and there are so many oak trees, and we can. Some of them are bent over. Some of them have lost branches. permanently because they've been struck by lightning or whatever. But the ones that have made it, as it were, made it into, and they are simply there in whatever grander means for them in their fullness. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of individual oak trees, but we can look at it and recognize it as an oak tree. That they all have fulfilled in some way or another the. Oak trees don't become elephants or squirrels. Acorn doesn't become an elephant or a squirrel. There's something, it means that acorn. This is what Aristotle, as I said, referred to as the energia, or the energy in this case, the acorn. There is something at work in it, something it needs and wants to be. And it's not, a giraffe, and it's not a fish. And you stand before a magnificent old tree in all its fullness, and you see this is the striving, this is the energy. We get the word energy from the Greek energia, that it's what was at work in that from the very beginning. It's an aspiration or a possibility that is in that. And I think our task as human beings is to say, what is that is from birth at work in us? What is that energy that needs and wants and to be what it was meant to be? And Camus said, I have no idea where the nature of anything came from. I just so he says, and perhaps I should just not write another word until I do. But on the other hand, he's so convinced of this, and he said he learned it from the Greeks, that he went on talking about it. Where does human nature come from? Who is there? A God? Is there? Where? That's not something he knew. He knew it's something he knew he hadn't the answer to, but he certainly had the question, and knew the truth of what it pointed to. If that makes any, I'm rambling at this point, so rescue me.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, let's go with Christine. Christine, followed by Deborah.
Thank you, Bob. I wanted to just mention to the group that Oedipus and Colonus is available on YouTube. There's a very beautiful and very moving performance of it right on YouTube. And I watched that one and another one, but it was such a moving play to watch. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the kind of the context from the audience point of view. Is it correct? Is my understanding that this was a huge cultural phenomenon, and that in fact citizens were more or less expected, or they came by the thousands? This was your civic, activity. That's one. And also, you read about this idea of catharsis on the part of the audience, but and just personally, I find them so deeply moving. I'm just, if you can say anything about, like, if I was a Greek in the Greek audience, what might my experience kind of?
Yeah, the production you're talking about, that's the one, the Gospel at Colonus?
I watched that one too, but the one I'm actually referring to was pretty acted out by, it was a more traditional play.
Yeah.
But I loved the gospel version. That was incredible.
Yeah,
That is how the regular one first, actually.
Mm-hmm. The Gospel of Colonus, I have found, in my view, is the most accurate traditional. It's the one that conveys, to my mind, what the experience I mean, a true dramatization, obviously modernization, but also true, because first of all, the Greek drama was danced and sung. You know, and that's why with live music and dancers and the long speeches were arias, and the dialogue was very often you know, a duos. It was a combination of dance, poetry, and music, and a full fusion of those elements. And most productions of Greek drama have eliminated the dance. They've eliminated the music, and have, I think, just cut the soul right out of Greek drama, and created, you know, a kind of Royal Shakespeare Company dramatic form that bears little resemblance to what the experience was actually like. In the other production that I've seen that it was so electrically exciting and just transporting was actually in the city of Olympia in Greece. They did a production of Aristophanes' Birds, and I've never forgotten that production. It still inhabits me, you know. But it had all of those elements, and the music, the dance, I think the difference between a gospel service, Christian gospel service in an evangelical or, you know, black gospel church, the difference between that and an Anglican mass, or an Anglican, you know, Sunday service of readings and so on. That's, to me, the difference, you know, reflective in some way of the difference between what was probably like in an ancient Greek theater and what it's like today in a staged performance of Oedipus or any other Greek tragedy. It's just somehow it can be powerful, but it's a different kind of power. It's not an ecstatic power. It's not power that just comes and whips you right off your feet. And so
that's what the Greek audience would be experiencing, more of that kind of just something that was really so electrifying. Sounds like,
well, and so communal. Probably people were moving around. I mean, you know.
were they dancing in the aisles?
No, I don't think so. But I think it was a happening, to use a '60s term, and not a perform. You know, not something where the lights go down and you're brought to a place where only certain forms of extremely, you know, you're not even supposed to cough or blow your nose in the theater, you know, once those lights go down and the performance begins. I don't, in the Greek, in Olympia, when the actors, when it was all done outside, and the stage, it was in the, you know, in the stands or whatever, it was very much, it was not an ancient Greek theater, but it was in the style of an ancient Greek theater. The people were eating and waiting for it to happen, waiting for it to begin. And when it was supposed to begin at whatever hour, and when it was 5 minutes after the hour, 10 minutes after the hour, the whole audience began to cry out, you know, get started, you know, and it was all done in Greek, and they were speaking in Greek, of course, but it was all just, you know, we're waiting here. get what's taking you and everything. There was an immediate. I mean, this was the behavior was one of a community that had come here to see something and get on with it. You know, we're
Thank
sitting out here waiting for the play to begin, and so there. And I think that they would when they were, if they were moved by something, I think you would hear it from the audience.
you.
And I think,
That gives me a better, bigger picture of what it might have been like. I appreciate that.
I mean, this is my own thought of but certainly the form of Greek theater, music and dance were so integral to it. For the most part, the choruses in modern Greek plays, if they move at all, they just move in to one side and then to the other side or whatever. There's a kind of barely moving, like you know what I mean. If they move at all, the chorus doesn't, and that's not. And also the singing was a great many of the lines in Greek plays, the choruses, they were all sung with musical accompaniment.
Well, thank you.
But catharsis is another whole thing. The other thing is that they probably the audience, its thought sat in it's been proposed, and there's evidence that the audience was, at least a large portion of the audience, most of the audience sat in their military ranks. So during the entire time, practically, of the 5th century, Athens was at war with somebody. I mean, they were an empire, and they were constantly at war. I mean, think of the last. My entire lifetime. I was born during World War II, and the United States has been at war, one war or another, basically in all but 10 or so years of my entire life. Athens was at war like that too, constantly, and they were divided. The various units were divided according to the tribes. Athens was divided into tribes, and the population were, and it's thought that each of the wedges of the theater, as it were, the sections of the theater were divided, and men, and the audience was thought to be mainly men. The men sat in with their military comrades. So there was that camaraderie and that unity, and they knew what most of these plays were about, because they were, I think, a great many of them were addressed at healing the pains and atrocities and violations which in one way or another that had been a part of their common experience as Athenian citizens and warriors. Because you were compelled to serve in the military from age 16 to age 60. And Sophocles lived till over 90, but most Athenians didn't. So 60 was pretty old at that time. It's not that young now, but no matter what we say. I mean, I'm 80, but that everyone will agree is old.
Shall we go with Deborah? Go ahead, Deborah.
I think maybe the time for my comment has passed, but I'll stick it in anyway. Years and years ago, when Hillman first moved to Connecticut and Thomas More followed him, they did a program on, this is what I'm remembering, Dionysos or Dionysos, as Hillman would say, and Apollo. And I distinctly remember, because it was fascinating to me, Hillman explaining that the archetype entered in the space between the actor's face and the mask, that the actor was mediating the archetype in that space. And that was, I just remember, that blew me away. I don't know why, that the idea that the understanding was so sophisticated.
Mm-hmm.
and that it wasn't about entering into you. In other words, there was an understanding that would be maybe possession, or so. I have that comment and wonder your thoughts about it. But after what you just said, which also blew me away, realizing that the audience was men, that they were being repaired or healed or taken through some version of the traumas they'd experienced or inflicted. I'm wondering, are the actors, like as in Shakespeare's day, were the actors all men? So then the mask has another role. I mean, that you are using your voice to convey a gender you are not, possibly.
The actors were definitely all men.
Okay, so this brings up another whole thing about the archetype living in that space in the mask, whether it's Aphrodite or Iphigenia, or, I mean, this, I don't know why, this captures me, you know, this understanding, this, it's like the makeup being, I can't remember which movie it is, but you watch an actor very carefully put on their makeup and assume the part as they put on, you know, I'm sure you know, but because I don't know theater, this is all news and new and exciting to me. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really good what you say, and this is James Hillman, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Thomas More were together because Thomas More had followed him up here, you know, from Texas. The program was great, I remember, but that gem really stayed with me.
Well, I think the extent of the inhabited state of the actors and dancers with which my wife and I worked in India, their possession had a lot to do with their, or it might have had something to do with their also ingesting psychotropic.
That was my next question.
Yes, they I mean, they were capable of. There was a lot of. They were capable of gymnastic. I mean, we would call them gymnastic, but of leaping into the air and twirling upside down in the air and coming down in the acting, the dancing that they. First of all, they could do it for hours and hours, and some of them, the dance master, who still danced, he was in his 80s, so, but I don't know that part, that the extent of this sort of being inhabited and being possessed in some ways. Possessed is not really an accurate word either.
No, it's not. But also being covered. In other words, there's something about containment and protection and a limit. Yeah.
Yeah, there was something else that you said too that I wanted to comment on, but I think that it has to be some kind of participation, of a dialogue almost between you and the character the mask you're wearing, and I mean, after all, the at least in the plays of Euripides, you know, it's in his real focus was on women. I mean, and mostly teenage, very young women.
The girl.
And his I actually wrote down.
This is very interesting, given Carol Gilligan's new book too. This whole take on Greek, by the way.
Yeah, I have it right here. That the 16 of his extant plays, 16 of the 18 extant plays of Euripides had female choruses. And then the choruses are the core of Greek drama. Really.
The heart, yeah.
And 12 of the 18 were about women. 8 had the titles of the eponymous title. I mean, they were named after women. The Medea, Iphigenia. 2 plays about Iphigenia. Those plays are all half of the plays he wrote bore the titles of women, and he
daughters.
He tried to. I mean, there were no women playwrights, there were no women actors, there were no women dancers, but I think he tried to give voice to, and there's historical evidence of there having been an uprising among women in Athens, serious uprising of women protesting the extreme misogyny and repression of women. Women were not allowed out in public without veils.
Right.
They were. You have to think of
Another mask.
contemporary Iran or Saudi Arabia to think of what the status of women, the social state of women was in Athens. That somehow, that women, when in the Peloponnesian War, which went on for 30 years, the male population was fighting the wars, and they were fighting wars on the Peloponnesian War was being fought simultaneously on multiple fronts, and so the men were away, and the women seem to have gained considerable voice and freedom and so on, and there's evidence that they were sick of war and wanted it to stop, and were sick of the games that men were playing that were destroying the city and destroying their lives, destroying their children, killing their sons, and so on. So they of a rebellion in Athens, and he this is, I think, if you imagine that this is a man, this is a chorus of men, who are in fact women. I mean, women who are in fact men. I mean, a chorus of female Athenians played by men. And just read a little bit of it. It says, that the rivers, sanctioned in their courses, turn and flow back upon their sources. The scheme of things is reversed. Men prove liars in their thoughts, while gods keep an unbroken trust. The scandal that is my life, the scandal that is my life, stories will remold into a thing of honor. Worth returns to the race of women. Abuse no longer clings to them. The muses who gave the ancient bards their songs of my unfaithfulness, may they go mute. Our thoughts, our side of things, have never been sung. Awesome Apollo, master of song, kept from our fingers the magic of the lyre. If he hadn't, the other sex would have our answer by now. An eon is a long time, long enough for the whole truth to come out. This song was sung by suffragettes in English. I mean, it was sung chanted by suffragettes on the streets of London during the suffragette movement. I mean, and so there is obviously the mask is of a woman. There's a man inside. So voicing words like that.
This is a gorgeous resonance to Carol Gilligan's new book, which is called In a Human Voice, where she explicates her guilt in gendering empathy and feeling and care as feminine in her original book, In a Different Voice, because boys are shut up and stop saying what they feel and know between the age of 4 and 7, and girls don't do it till 10 or adolescence. So the whole new book is In a Human Voice, and here you hear, this is what I'm projecting or getting from what you're saying, that this whole thing was right there in the, you know what I mean? This claiming of a whole voice that had feeling and subjectivity and emotion, and this is fascinating. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And Medea, in Euripides' Medea, in the phalanx formations of Athenian combat, to be in the front ranks was almost certain death. Like going over the top in World War I, the first one's over the top. Yeah. And that was basically a death. And Medea shouts out to the Athenian audience, primarily men in the audience, almost exclusively men, it's thought, shouting out to them, "I would rather stand in the front ranks 3 times and bear one of your sons."
Mhm.
I mean, those are, and now what is the dissonance in that actor who is a
Or
young,
not.
or not,
What if
or
this
not,
is what
yeah,
people actually feel and they get to speak it because of the mask?
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to be difficult. I'm just
No,
excited.
no, exactly. I
Uh-huh.
agree with you. Yeah.
Looks like Penelope has a question.
Don't really have a question, Bob. Thank you so much for your deep love and knowledge of this material. I wanted to ask you, because we're coming toward our end, you taught at Hampshire for some time, and I'm wondering what it was like for you to teach these young people what you're teaching us tonight over a period of years. How was that for you to teach this material?
Well, it was, I'm trying to say something that would not sound just meaningless. I mean, it was the first thing, it was wonderful. It was a rare privilege. My students were not numerous. Greek drama, Greek and Indian drama I taught together. Greek and Indian drama was not, there was no stampede to be in the class, but they were, I think it had a profound effect on my students, and it had a profound effect on me to share that with them. And most of them got it after a while. I mean, I think it changed their, it was wonderful to I miss that deeply.
Mhm.
And the I mean, they were wonderful to work with for the most part, and I I remember one of my students, he wanted to go into physics. He was a first year student or whatever. He was on course to study physics, and he took the course in ancient Greek drama, and he just said he didn't know what happened to him, but it was he now, that was 20 some years later, he's still teaching. He studied classics.
Mhm.
He did his thesis on Euripides, and has never looked back, and he said it just it was like, the evangelical rapture, he just left his shoes on the floor, and as it were, was taken up, and but I think in various ways students were changed. I mean, they were, and it was it's such a counter narrative to the voices of the Greeks, and that experience is such a counter narrative to questions of gender and youth and I think it empowered a lot of students to find their own voices, and so and it gave them a perspective that I think that was important to them, but it was certainly important to me, and I do really love. It's changed me, and continues to in my life. Yeah, thank you for asking that, and but it's not easy to put into words. What is I taught for 52 years, and 48 of them at Hampshire.
Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned Jung, and I was drawn to Jung because of his love of philosophy, his love of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm 76, there you are. I'm really interested in working with people who are at that point of reviewing and facing the infinite. And I'm very interested in holding that space for people to allow the infinite to be present, because so many people don't reach that place with the support, with the staff. I'm a staff. I'm a staff for that last period when people are really having this opportunity. So I want to say that to you.
Yes.
Thank you for carrying that. And you obviously changed that young man's life for sure. And it only takes one to carry it on. So thank you so much for your devotion and your great love of this material.
Well, it's so important to, I mean, that's where the stages of life, I especially appreciate the Hindu stages of life that, up to 25, you just are taking in, being burdened with carrying the tradition, societal traditions and values, and you're just being, it's like a pack animal that you're loaded onto, and it's compulsory to be celibate, and at 25 you're supposed to cease celibacy, form a family, get out into the world, and do your life work in that sense, and contribute to society, be part of the wider society, whether it's as a merchant or as a teacher or whatever it is that you do. You're out there in the world, and then at 50 you become a forest dweller, which means it's your first step back out of the where you're no longer trying to advance your career, and you're no longer trying, you're slowly weaning yourself of all the pressures, the passions, the ambitions, and everything. Ambition is slowly becoming out of place in you, because it becomes inappropriate to be ambitious. At 75, you move from the forest and begin to you begin the life of renunciation, in the sense, and all of that, the last, from 75 on, you're supposed to be focused, single-mindedly focused on rounding the bend, as Oedipus is, and oriented towards the infinite. I mean,
right.
And we don't have any sense of that anymore.
Well, some of us do.
Oh yes, I just mean as a society out there in the public world, there's you can be very much alone with that. View.
Thank you.
And we don't get much guidance, is all I'm saying.
No, in this culture.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bob, I want to wrap this up with just echo the thank you and comments of Penelope. And I love the way you took us right into the plays, into the dialogue and the story. Very lively, and your commentary is very deep.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure and privilege. I'm very happy to meet all of you.
Thank you, and good night to everyone.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.